gentlemen, and it's a pleasure for me to welcome you all to today's lecture on the spread of Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia, Russia, and Bulgaria. Before we begin, if I may be allowed to read a short biography of our speaker here, Dr. Lyudmila Kosawa. Dr. Lyudmila Kosawa is a lecturer at the Center for Eastern Languages and Culture, Sofia University, and a curator at the Asian Arts section of the National Gallery in Bulgaria. Her research, Her research and teaching interests include Tibetan Buddhism, Buddhist art, and women in Buddhism. She has taught courses on Buddhist art, female figures in Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan culture and religions of East Asia. She also teaches Hatha Yoga and Kundalini Yoga based on the system of Yogi Bhajan. Now, without much ado, I would like to request Dr. Lyudmila to begin her lecture.
Thank you very much. Welcome to all. Namaste. Tashdile. It's a great honor to be here again. I visited this center almost 8 years ago, and I love this place. So any moment to be able to be connected with Tibetan culture, it's a great opportunity, especially in India. So it's a really amazing opportunity to be, first of all, in India, which is a holy land of Buddhism, and to be able to talk about Tibetan Buddhism, especially in the region where it is not so popular. I mean, Bulgaria, my country. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the organizer of Tibetan House, Professor Shishibawa, who unfortunately left just now because of some complications on the roads of India. So you are all aware of that. So let's hope and pray that there will be peace in India in these incoming days. So it's very important for all of us. Is it possible to reduce the light? Make it a little bit dark. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So the topic for tonight, it's a vast topic. Why we choose this title for the program. Actually, we were planning to make a whole course in the period of 2 months with Professor Shishibawa here in India, but the things are changing, so maybe we can do it in the future. So today, as our wish, and especially Professor Shishibawa, to dedicate more time, research in the direction of Buddhism in the region of Mongolia, Russia, Eastern Europe as a whole. Sorry for the delay. It's okay. So, is it better now? Okay, thank you so much. So I can move easily. So I choose the image of the holiest mantra, symbol of Tibetan Buddhism, the mantra Om Mani Padme Hung, here written in different languages, in Sanskrit, Tibetan, Mongolian, Russian, and Bulgarian. The mantra of great compassion, the mantra that invokes the compassionate energy of enlightened beings, of Bodhisattva, like Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. And being in this center, which is the home of Tibet, home of Tibetan culture, and let's say home of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Of course, first of all, I would like to pay homage to His Holiness as a reincarnation of Bodhisattva, of compassion. So, talking about the spreading of Tibetan Buddhism all over the world, including Mongolia, Russia, and Bulgaria, one of the symbol, one of the emblem of this process of spreading of the holy Buddhism is because of him, because of his holiness. So we all know the history, we all know the challenges, the difficulties, but there is always, excuse me, okay, there's always both sides of the process that happen in the world. So from one side, due to political process in Tibet with the Chinese invasions, there were so many tortures, so many troubles, but there is one slight and also big benefit that the Tibetan Buddhism was spread all over the world, and it's still spreading, even to places like Bulgaria, like my country. So let's start this short journey among the two continents, Europe and Asia. And paying attention on this map, we can see the three countries that I'm going to talk today. And it will be a very brief talk, of course, facing very few details concerning the spreading of Tibetan Buddhism in the region, because it's a huge subject. And I decided to talk today more according to my experience and the personal meeting that I had with people practicing Tibetan Buddhism, and of course some important moments. So first of all, we see Russia, the huge territory of the powerful land, the powerful nation. We see Mongolia, and I guess you don't see where is Bulgaria. It's here, almost like a dot, a red dot. But it doesn't mean it's small, a part of the territory. So let's start the journey of spreading of Tibetan Buddhism with Mongolia. This is an image of, again, Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the great Bodhisattva of compassion or generosity in Tibetan, from the most important, let's say, monastery in Mongolia. We will go back to this monastery. But first of all, before to say a few words very briefly about Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia, let's feel the atmosphere of the nature, geography, the people. So one of the reasons why Tibetan Buddhism was adopted so easily, let's say, in Mongolia, one of the reasons is because of the similarity of the way of living between Tibetans, especially eastern part of Tibet, like Amdo region, and Mongolia. The life of the nomad people, the natural preconditions of these people who are wandering, who are not staying in one place, who are just move. They moving through the nature, through the open space, they can be close to the sky, they can feel the power of impermanence. Something that we can feel sense in India very easily, not in Bulgaria, not in the West, where everything is strict, organized, and if the bus comes 10 minutes later, we are nervous already. But here, even if we miss the flight, the plane, the program, the schedule, still everything is natural. It's just a process that is coming and going at the same time. So the nomad way of living, the nomad way of perceiving the nature is something very important for Mongolian people. Buddhism is one of the, of course, official religion in Mongolia, apart with the local beliefs and the shamanism, which was always important part of the beliefs of Mongolian people through century. So the belief, even let's say before the formation of shamanism, the beliefs of the Mongolian people in the power of the sky, the Tengri, the god of the sky, or just the power of the sky as a father. This idea was always important part of the way of thinking of Mongolian people. Based on that conceptions, the father, the connection with the sky, we can see the blue color everywhere, even in the shamanic and the Buddhist symbols until nowadays. Based on this conception, the typical shamanic tradition, which is preserved until nowadays in Mongolia, it was spread and mixed with Buddhism. So, as I mentioned, the reason for the easily adoption of Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia, because of the nomad people, the similar conditions, way of living, and the other side, the possibility of Buddhism everywhere in the world, wherever it's spreading, to be flexible, to adopt, to be able to merge with the local beliefs in a very peaceful way. So it was impossible, in the same way like in Tibet, to ignore the local beliefs of the people, which were always a very strong part of their mentality, their spirituality. And what happened in Mongolia, and after we can see the same process in parts of Russia, like Siberia, initially Buddhism was able to perceive and to adapt the practice, some of the philosophy according, embracing the local beliefs of shamanism. So there are different versions. Some people say that the earliest, the first levels of spreading of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, or just Buddhism in Mongolia were even 4th, 5th century. There are evidence from the Chinese side and so on. But we can say more, we can speak more particularly about spreading of Buddhism in, let's say, 13th, 14th century, with different processes, of course. And this is the period when there were more historically proved the contacts between Tibetan and Mongolia. So the third reason why exactly Tibetan Buddhism and not the Indian classical Theravada Buddhism was spread in Mongolia, because of the historical events that happened between these both countries. So it was a natural process of communication, of sharing, and the ability to even politically to exchange ideas and spiritual practices as a whole. So in the period of 15th century, there were processes where the spreading of Buddhism was diminishing in the name of shamanism again. So we cannot say that Buddhism and shamanism, they were always going together smoothly. So let's say 15th century shamanism was more strongly spread due to, again, historical process. And after that, 17th century, the period when the Buddhism started to spread in Russia, we can speak about the second wave of spreading of Buddhism in Mongolia. And after that, 18th, 19th century, there were more and more Buddhist monasteries built in the area, and until the period of communism. So, talking about these three countries, Mongolia, Russia, and Bulgaria, the other common thing between them is the communism. So we, as Bulgarian, I'm very happy that today we have people from Bulgaria, friends who have visited Bulgaria, and our dear friend who is the ambassador of India in Bulgaria. I don't see him, Mr. Manchanda, an Indian person who is studying Bulgarian language. So the space of spreading of cultures, it's limitless, boundless. So anyway, Buddhism in Mongolia has a very typical characteristic which can be seen in Tibet, in Bhutan, in Mustang, in Ladakh, in the whole Himalayan region. So this is basically Vajrayana Buddhism. And all the statues, the Thangka paintings that we can see in Tibet, they're quite similar in Mongolia as well. The way how the historical events happened for a couple of centuries, with a close interrelationship between Tibet and Mongolia, including the title of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm sure you know that the title Dalai comes from Mongolia, and they consider that the third Dalai Lama had visited Mongolia when actually he received officially this title. So the first and second Dalai Lama, they were, they were announced like that before, after this process. So there are many historical events. I'm not going to focus on that, just going briefly to some essential point related with Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia. So paying attention again to the main monastery. As I mentioned, during the communism, 90s, end of 80s years, in Mongolia, in Siberia, part of Russia, there were thousands of monasteries, hundreds monasteries destroyed, and hundreds lamas or monks who were killed, unfortunately. Similar processes we can see in Russia, but not in Bulgaria, simply because the history of Buddhism in Bulgaria is very short, and it starts with the beginning of so-called democracy. So this Ganden Tekcheli monastery in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, it was constructed by the 5th Jetsun Dampa Kuduktu in 89. We're going to come back again to this name and title. They are, even if you pay attention to one single monastery in Mongolia, you can see that during the different processes, different century even, the way how it was built, the way how it is developed, it's a reflection of the historical and political process in the country. So the first temple was actually Gunga Cholin Datsam. Datsam is the Mongolian word for temple, which is also used in Russia. So only the one wooden pillar remains from this temple. And in 1838, the Ganden Tekcheli temple was built along with the private residency of the same High Lama, as I mentioned, Kuduktu. The 13th Dalai Lama, he stayed in the residence in 94. And later on, there were another temple and three more temples that were built in this area. And this is maybe the most famous statue in Mongolia. The same Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara in the monastery. It's a huge statue, symbol of the Mongolian Buddhism. So since 1992, the supreme leader of the center of all Mongolian Buddhists and abbot of the same monastery has been Lama Gabchu Chojmans Damberel. Here we can see combination of Tibetan and Mongolian names. Actually, in Mongolia and in Russia, the official Buddhist language is Tibetan. So the way how Vajrayana and mainly, let's say, Gelugpa school from the 4th school of Tibetan Buddhism, Gelugpa school, the school of His Holiness Dalai Lama, and the so-called Yellow Hat school, it is more widely spread. And the Tibetan language, usually the Mongolian and the Russian lamas, they're supposed to study Tibetan language. They use, same like in Bhutan, in the monastery, the Tibetan language is a sacred language. Talking about the languages in Mongolia especially, during the communism, the Cyrillic script, which we saw in the beginning with the mantra, was adopted in Mongolia, which gave a lot of challenges for the Mongolian people, because the sound, the pronunciation is quite different from the way how even we as Bulgarians use the Cyrillic script. Anyway, so here we can see photograph of Lama Gabchu along with His Holiness Dalai Lama during his last visit in Mongolia, just recently, last year. I guess you remember that there were so many struggles, challenges and protests from the Chinese side during this visiting, but still he was able to do it, something that is not possible nowadays in the Russian Buddhist republics, and I will mention again about it. So one figure which is very emblematic for the Buddhism in Mongolia again, this is Gegen Zanabazar. The high Saint Zanabazar, 17th-18th century. Because my background is mainly related with Buddhist art, for me he's one of the most amazing Buddhist artists, and especially because of these images of Dara. So he was a great scholar, great Lama teacher who had education in Tibet, and he was a great philosopher, a great artist, a builder of monasteries. He established a whole school for art, Buddhist art, which is survived until nowadays in Mongolia. But from the point of view of Buddhist art, these are maybe the most amazing and vivid figures, full of life and unique beauty. Figures of green Tara and white Tara. And because my research in the last 9 years related more with the field of Buddhist women, so here we have our dear friend from Bhutan, physically, and I'm very happy to see her. We just met Sona Mangmo. We met with her during the Buddhist Women Conference in Hong Kong, and in very miracles way we are meeting right now here, and actually our first talk was related with a Buddhist woman. So I decided to mention today another figure related with Mongolian Buddhism from the perspective of the women. And this lady we met again in Hong Kong. So she, Kunze Chime, she's considering Mongolia as an emanation of White Tara. So basically the tradition of reincarnated Lama or Tulku, it is preserved in Tibet, in Mongolia as well, in Russia as well. This is tradition which is not so popular, of course, in Theravada Mahayana Buddhism, but it's very, very typical for Vajrayana Buddhism. Even though Kunze Chime, let's say Mongolian yogini woman practitioner, she's very humble. She just mentioned a few times that many lamas, they consider her as emanation of Tara or Dogma, Dokar, the white Tara. So we were able to talk with her to discuss different subjects related to Buddhism in Mongolia. So that's why I decided to share something from my experience discussing about Buddhism in Mongolia with her, because her life is a reflection. It's a mirror about the spreading of Tibetan Buddhism. She was able to study Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia only 2 years, and after she went to India, Dharamshala, to study Buddhism for 13 years. So whenever we talk about even Tibetan Buddhism, Mongolia, Russia, Bulgaria, we always come back to the source, India. All the roads, they bring us to the source. So even nowadays, many Mongolian people, of course, many people from Russia, monks, nuns, they come basically in India. They cannot go to Tibet, unfortunately, so easily, especially for study practice. They come to India, and again, they pay homage to this holy land, and they have the opportunity to study because of that. Kunze Chime, she, a part of her training, she studied in highest Buddhist college for 13 years, and one of her special talent is that she's singing. As you can see here, in Hong Kong she was performing the Cho practice, cutting ego practice, with a very beautiful melody. So I just wanted to pay attention to two of her main teachers. Of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is first, root guru, Dalai Lama. But these two figures, the other teachers of her, they are very eminent scholars. And again, symbol about the spreading of Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia with the emphasis of the connection with India. So His Holiness Kalka Jetsum Dampa Rinpoche, as I mentioned, in relation to the monastery built by the fifth Kalka Jetsum Dampa Rinpoche, this Mongolian eminent Lama, he was recognized as the ninth reincarnation of Jetsum Dampa Kutuktu. And according to Mongolian people, the third highest Lama in the hierarchy of Tibetan Buddhism, along with Dalai Lama and Panchen Lama, he is the leader of Gelug lineage among the Khalkha Mongols. These are the largest subgroup of Mongol people. So in 1936, Dampa Rinpoche was recognized as the reincarnation of the previous Bok Kami. This is a very important term in Mongolian Buddhism, the Great Emperor, a title for the highest Lama in Mongolia. But you can imagine this historical period of time. His identity was kept a secret for 55 years due to the persecution of Buddhists by the sovereign socialist state, the Mongolian People's Republic. And the ninth Khalkha Jetsun Dampo Rinpoche was enthroned in Dharamsala, again in India, by the 14th Dalai Lama in 1991. And 8 years later, he was enthroned in Mongolia when the communist regime finished, so then he was able to come back in his land and to meet his followers, to receive the entronization and the blessing and meeting with his people. So this is also very emblematic, a very symbolical event, how even though for 9 years, you can for 50 years, the Mongolian people, they don't have access with their own highest Lama, with their leader. So the process that happened in Tibet nowadays with the people who are living in Tibet is the same. Somehow the history repeats in a very sad way, but with all these side effects. So this is the meeting between Khonse Chime and her teacher Dampo Rinpoche, and the picture during her life of as a nun. Nowadays she has 2 kids, and she has organization for Buddhist women in Mongolia and so on. And this is her second main teacher, the 19th Kushuk Bakula Rinpoche, who's a very eminent Buddhist scholar and also symbol of the connection between Mongolia, Tibet, and India. Kushuk Bakula Rinpoche is one of the best-known lamas of Ladakh. He was recognized by the 13th Dalai Lama as the reincarnation of Bakula Arhat. And something very interesting for our ambassador in Bulgaria, who left, I think, from 1990 to 2000, he was Indian ambassador in Mongolia, and he helped for the revival of Buddhism in the country. So imagine if our ambassador are lamas, monks, spiritual person, how much benefit and growing of spirituality we can have. So I don't need to present these photos, you can see very important meetings. And this is the 20th reincarnation, Kushuk Bakula Rinpoche, again in Ladakh with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So just a brief journey through Mongolia in order to reach the territory of Russia. So I'm sorry for the speed, and really for 1 hour it's difficult to cover such subject. So just at some point, and we can have a time for discussion. So the huge territory of Russia, Asian land, ancient country, Asian culture, with so much ups and downs in the history. So Buddhism officially nowadays is one of the main religions in Russia, along with the Christianity, of course, and Judaism and Islam, some part. So talking about Buddhism in Russia, as you can see on this map, there are 3 officially Buddhist republics in the so-called Russian Federation. These are Buryatia, Tuva, and Kalmykia. A part of them, Buddhism was spreading in the other part of Russia, like of course Moscow and St. Petersburg, and the road of Buddhism to Russia passed through Mongolia. So here comes the link between these both countries. In officially 17th century, Buddhism was spread to Russia from Mongolia. Of course, there are processes even before that. Before to pay attention to these 3 Buddhist republics, Buryatia, Kalmykia, and Tuva, which are considered like a golden Buddhist triangle in Russia, the places where the Buddhist tradition is preserved. And nowadays we can even say there is revival of Buddhism in this land. So in Russia, officially Buddhism was recognized in 1741 by 2 great women. Again, homage to the femininity. So the Empress Elizabeth Petrovna, 18th century, she was the first Russian leader who allowed Buddhists in Russia to accept and to practice officially Buddhism. and the Empress Katerina II, or Katerina the Great, famous in the history, 18th century, her efforts allows the Russian Buddhist people to have their own Buddhist leaders. Before 18th centuries, the Russian people, including in the Buddhist Republic, they have only leaders from Mongolia and Tibetan Lamas as well. So with the help of Katerina the Great, as far as I can remember, she was also considered as reincarnation of White Tara from some Lamas. So I don't remember exactly the sources, but I have some memories of that. So White Tara is coming from the history of this land. So she allows Russian people to choose their own spiritual leaders, Buddhist leaders, and to, of course, this made the roots of Buddhism even deeper and stronger in the history of Russia. Again, there are between 17th century, 18th, 19th century, until the period of communism, there were a period of strong revival of Buddhism in the land with the building of different monastery of Dazan, the most famous until nowadays, Ivolginsky Dazan in Buryatia, opened in 1945. You can see image of it. So this temple, it was the residence of the Central Spiritual Board of Buddhists of the USSR, the name of the Russia during the communism. And later on, this was the place of the Buddhist Traditional Sangha of Russia, the main organization of Buddhist people in Russia, and as well as Panditu Khambu Lama. So we'll talk about, again, this term Khambu Lama or Khamba Lama, basically this Mongolian and Buryat term for leader of the Buddhist people, Khamba Lama. Khamba comes from Khenpo, the Tibetan term Khenpo, like abbot of monastery or the one who finished the highest Buddhist education. So Ivolginsky Dazan in Buryatia, it was the place of the highest leader of Buryatia and Russian people, and Russian Buddhist people as a Khambu Lama. In 18th century temples that they were officially acknowledged in Imperial Russia in this period. So there are other places, of course, and again, very important temple, which is built in St. Petersburg, the first Dazan in Europe, the first Buddhist temple in Europe. This is the Dazan Guruzet Chonei. Last year, I think they celebrated 100 years anniversary with a huge event in this temple. Until nowadays, there are constant program and very active activities all the time. So these images of the construction of the Buddhist temple in St. Petersburg are from the exhibition that was held during the conference that, again, I'm going to mention at the beginning of August with His Holiness the Dalai Lama here in Delhi. So I pick up these photos from this exhibition. So these are images of Buddhist temple in the three Buddhist Republic, Buryatia, Kalmykia, and Tuva. And nowadays we can speak about around 30 temples in Buryatia, 22 in Kalmykia, and 16 in Tuva. And the type of Buddhism in these three republics, it's again Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism. So very briefly, Buryatia, Kalmykia, and Tuva. So Buryatia is located in the Siberia, on the border with Mongolia, and the main people living there are Buryat. These are the 70% of the Siberian people. And during the 17th century, when Buddhism was spread from Russia to Mongolia, during the same century, the Kalmyk people, they emigrated from the region of Mongolia to the east-west part of Russia, near to Caspian Sea. So nowadays Kalmykia is in the European part. This is the only officially Buddhist republic in Europe. And main people, the Kalmyk people, basically they are Oirat, These are Mongol tribes again. But nowadays they have very interesting story of immigration from Mongolia to east-west part of Russia, which is completely different territory in regard of climate, geography, and so on. And the people of Tuva, these are also completely different people because as a nation they are Turkic, and they are the Turkic people of Tuva. They belongs to the in the world there are only two groups of Turkic people who are officially Buddhist. These are Turkic and Uyghur. Nowadays in the China, one of the province, I just forget it anyway. So the Turkic people of Tuva. So we can say that these three nations, they have different background, different languages, and so on. But there are so many similarities between the way Tibetan Buddhism was spread from 17th century into 18th century. Maybe there is a 1 century difference between Tuva and the other country. And nowadays we can speak about revival of Buddhism in the three lands. So I will speak a little bit more about three of them. But just before that, showing you the three leaders, Buddhist leaders of the three republics. This is the 25th Panditu Khambu Lama, Dampa Padmayevich Ayushev. He's the spiritual leader of Buryatia and also officially all the Russian Buddhists. Our beloved Deloduk Rinpoche, who was organized this conference a few days ago in Delhi. He is the spiritual leader of Kalmykia. So the terms, because of the difference of the languages of the three republics, of course, the three of them, they use Russian. So usually people, these three republics, they understand each other through Russian language. They study, if they really want to practice Tibetan Buddhism, especially the monks, the nuns, they have to study Tibetan language. And a part of that, they have their local Buryat, Kalmyk, Tuvan language, which is completely different. So they have a lot of struggles with this medium of spreading Buddhism. So Khambu Lama, the title of Buddhist leaders in Buryatia. The leader of Kalmykia is called Shajin Lama, the head of Buddhists in Kalmykia, and Deloduk Rinpoche, an incarnation of Tilopa. A part of his role as a leader of Kalmyk Buddhist people, he's also a representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama in Russia, Mongolia, and the whole region of the Russian republics. He was born in the United States, and so he was a monk for a while, again in India, South India, and nowadays his office is made in Moscow, so he has a lot of activities for the revival of Buddhism in the region. And Lobsang Chamsi, this is the Kambi Lama, how they call in Tuva, their spiritual leader, Kambi Lama. He also finished his study as a monk in South India in Gelugpa Tibetan monastery. So in the last 2-3 years, he is the spiritual head of Tuva. So all of them, they follow Gelugpa school. All of them, they pay homage, of course, to His Holiness Dalai Lama as the main spiritual leader. As followers of Gelugpa school, they worship mainly Tsongkhapa, of course, Buddha Shakyamuni, and some main deities like Padan Lama, the main protector of Tibet and Russia and Mongolia. Here we can see three of the leaders of this three Buddhist republic. And this statue of Buddha Shakyamuni is in the temple of Kalmykia. Tsongkhapa, as I mentioned, and one of the most important figures in the Tibetan Buddhism in the region, and one lovely photo of His Holiness with the Russian priest. So the sense of humor, it's something that opens the heart of the people. Which means that sometimes it's not easy to accept, to be tolerant among, especially among the spiritual leaders. So we know, of course, course, His Holiness is always very tolerant, open to all spiritual leaders, but we cannot say this for the other side. So in Mongolia until nowadays there is the so-called process of westernizing, which means that many people, they are also open to Christianity, which is far away from the local original beliefs of the Mongolian people. But still, and in some interview with Buddhist leader of Mongolia, he mentioned that he's afraid because many young Mongolian people, they're open to Christianity, not because of really deep spiritual interest, but because of Hollywood and the Western culture, which is phenomenon, quite strange, but it exists, just like idea of this process. Very few words about the revival of Buddhism in Russia from perspective of the scientific, let's say, meetings. So, talking about the Russian Golden Triangle of Buddhism, I just want to mention 3 events that happened in these 3 republics, and I was very fortunate to be able to be part of them and to visit these places. So there were one conference in Buryatia, in Ulan-Ude. The 3 conference was headed by Daltok Rinpoche. He was there and helping for the organization. And during all these events, the first one in Buryatia happened in the temple, the town of Elo Rinpoche, in Ulan-Ude, the capital of Buryatia. This is his Datsang, his temple. So during all these events, the title, the message was what has to be done for the revival of Buddhism. And the message was mainly related with the idea of what Daltok was insisting during the 3 conferences, is that the people, they need to learn, they need to know what exactly is Buddhism. Because for the period of several centuries in Russia, for example, there is a very strong faith in Buddhism, which is also related with the idea of identity. I don't have time to talk more, and I'm not expert in that field, but during the communism, I mentioned in Mongolia, in Russia, for example, Kalmykia, how the population, 3 countries, they have very small population, around 300,000 people. And during the communism, half of the population were dead in Siberia. You know, this is a process that we cannot imagine what means the half population of one nation to be just disappear like that. And but what helped them to survive, it was Buddhism, it was the faith, no matter what happened. And like the Mongolian Buddhist leader Kambalam, he said that during the communism, you know, the communist people, they destroyed the monastery. Talking about the 3 doors of liberation, body, speech, and mind, they can destroy the door of the body, monastery, temples, tankas, whatever. They can ask people to close the door of the speech, don't talk about Buddhism, but they cannot enter in the door of the mind. They cannot destroy the heart belief. And this is what helps them to survive. So I was really able to feel this staying in this country. And when I talked to some Kalmyk people, they said that actually we are so much compassionate to Tibetan people because we know how they feel. We passed through that already. So we are so much compassionate, understanding what does it mean to lose your country, to be able, the whole population, they were suppressed to move to Siberia. So it was a very horrible process, but still what keeps them alive, what helped them to survive as a nation, to keep their identity, was Buddhism. So, of course, as I mentioned, nowadays the young people, not all of them, they're so devoted, open. Most of them, the young people from these 3 countries, they want to go to Moscow, St. Petersburg, to find a job, to find money. The life in these 3 republics is not easy, so it's difficult to find job. In this aspect, the social aspect is important as well. So during the conference in Ulan-Ude, they were opening of a stupa of peace. It was a beautiful event with a stupa filled with holy relics, including from Buddha and many saints and so on. And this is the symbol of Buddhism in Kalmykia. This is the biggest, the largest Buddhist temple in Europe as a whole. The golden abode of Shakyamuni Buddha in the capital called Elista. So during the conference that happened in Elista, Teluturku Rinpoche, he organized great events with celebration of the 10th year anniversary of this temple, which was, I can say, magically born. So His Holiness Dalai Lama visited the three republics. Basically, he was first time in Russia in 1979. After that, he visited Mongolia, Buryatia, Kalmykia, Tuva in 1991, 1992, 1993. Tuva once, Kalmykia twice, Buryatia 3 times. And this temple was built, so we celebrated 10 years, 2006, and 2005 was the last visit of Holiness in the region, when he told to Teluturku Rinpoche, you should make a temple. And he built this huge, amazing temple for 1 year. When you visited, I wish for those of you who have never been in this region, please go and see what can be done for 1 year. It's really, really amazing place to be seen, with library, with center for research, and so on. This is part of the conference people, and during the same event there were 30 monks from South India, which were performing Cham, or Tsam, as they pronounce in Mongolian Russia, ceremony. So it was a huge event with so many additional programs. Here is a process of ritual when Teluturku Rinpoche is paying homage to Padan Lama during the Cham ceremony as a main protector Tibet and Russian republics and so on. And here is one of the holiest places, again very symbolic for Buddhism in Kalmykia, the so-called lonely tree. There is a story that one monk from Kalmykia, he visited Tibet twice and he brought the seeds of trees. He planted several seeds and only one survived. So this is an area of steppes, very huge land, and this beautiful tree is the only tree in the whole area and considered as the symbol of the spirit of the Kalmyk people that can be kept for a century no matter what happened. Because whenever there is a huge empty territory, the wind is very strong. But the way this lonely tree survived is the symbol reminding for the Kalmyk people. A lot of Lungtam prayer flags, an image of His Holiness Dalai Lama inside. And just maybe a month ago, Chalru Rinpoche, he opened a stupa of Kalachakra at the same place, of this lonely tree. So during the conference, Teluturku Rinpoche opened several stupa in the whole region around the capital and the so-called Lagan region of Kalmykia. This is the stupa of enlightenment. And there is another stupa of enlightenment in the steppes. These are some of the monks from South India. This is how the landscape looks like in Kalmykia. So this is the third conference that happened in Tuva last year, Buddhism in the third millennium. So it was very interesting subject with, again, people from the region. Trends and prospects for development. And again, the idea of such conference, how to make the process of understanding of Buddhism, spreading of Buddhism more available for the people. Here we can see Teluturku Rinpoche and the head of Tuvan Buddhist. And this is the main Buddhist temple in the capital, Kyzyl, in Tuva. By the way, Kyzyl is considered as a center of Asia. There is a monument in the capital which said this is the center of Asia in the Kyzyl. Among my friends, whenever I was traveling this region, when I say I'm going to Kyzyl or Elista, where? What? I don't know about you, but my experience, 90% of my friends were totally shocked. What is this? Tuva? What? Nobody knows. Which is strange. So anyway, this is the main temple of Kami Lama of Tuva, where he's staying. And again, the similar landscapes with the steppe, with the vast space, with the stupas. Tuva, like Buryatia, like Mongolia, is an area where Buddhism and shamanism are very, very strong related. Wherever we see stupa or Buddha statue, especially this is the place called the footprint of Buddha, where there is a stupa again by Shivala Rinpoche made 10 years ago. And basically Tuvan people, they consider every tree as a sacred, every place is a holy place. And wherever there is a Buddhist monument, you can always see some kind of shamanic symbols as well, mixed together. These are the ruins of one of the Asian temple in Tuvan. And next to him there is a new built monastery as well. And this is the beautiful landscape of Tuvan holy places. So this is, I'm going to finish soon. These are the images from the conference that happened at the beginning of this month, very close by, in Taj Mahal Hotel. And this conference was a very historical event, meeting for the first time Russian scientists with the Buddhist scholars. And this was an amazing dialogue, again headed, organized by Dr. Rinpoche. And here we have Venerable Geshe Dorje Dandel as the director of Tibet House, who gave a wonderful speech during the conference, along with Geshe Laktor, the director of Tibetan Library in Dharamsala, and basically 7 Russian scholars. So it was a great meeting that can be seen online. The teachings were recorded and so on. And this was a very important step for the, again, revival of Buddhism in Russia. And very briefly, Bulgaria. What we know about this small territory. Only 6 million people, same like Tibet. 6 is very important number. 6 monkeys, 6 realms of samsara, 6 millions of Tibetan, whatever happened in their history, and 6 million of Bulgarian people. I cannot say that Tibetan Buddhism was spread logically in Mongolia, Russia, Bulgaria, but historically the events are quite similar, because officially we can talk about the beginning of spreading of Tibetan Buddhism in Bulgaria with the first and only unfortunate visit of His Holiness in Bulgaria in 1991. So this is the year when he visited Bulgaria during his trip in Litva, Latvia, and the same year he went to Tuva, Buryatia, Kalmykia. So somehow historically the events are connected. So, 1991, His Holiness visited Bulgaria and gave a speech in Sofia University. So we are proud of this event. This is where I work. This is where Yana, my friend, also have studied recently. This is our main national university, more than 125 years old, something like that. So this is images very precious for us during his visit. This is our traditional way to welcome guests and foreigners with special bread, honey, and some kind of spice. So His Holiness visited Bulgaria with Alexander Berzin. So you know he was for a while translator of His Holiness. I've seen his book in your library. And the second picture below, this is the meeting of His Holiness with the first president after the communism. The communism collapsed in Bulgaria in 1989. His Holiness came 1991, so just 3 years, when in Bulgaria was an extremely difficult period of time. Empty shops, no electricity. It was a really very strange period of time. And we were almost, I can say, there were a lot of protests of people on the streets and so on. And it was a historical moment for us. And after his visit, somehow there was a process of peace and harmonizing. So Zheluzhelev was the first president during the democracy, and he was able to meet His Holiness. And 2 years later, in 1993, there was the first Sant Mandala created in Bulgaria, again Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, by two Tibetan monks of Nanking Monastery. And this is a unique mandala because you can see Tibetan and Bulgarian flag around the mandala. Something that I'm sure you have never seen a mandala like that. Neither me, I'm sure it was the only one. Last year there were the second, so we had only two Sant Mandala in Bulgaria constructed until nowadays. Last year one Lama from Mustang, he made a mandala of Medicine Buddha in Bulgaria. And very briefly, and at the end, the Tibetan Buddhism that is spread in Bulgaria. So I will go through the four main schools of Tibetan Buddhism from the perspective of which one is more famous, let's say. So the most popular form of Tibetan Buddhism in Bulgaria is the so-called Taiwan Way. This is the Tibetan Karma Kagyu, part of Kagyu school, headed by 17 Karmapa Trinitaria Dorje. So we know about the controversy of the 17 Karmapa, we don't go into details about it. But this Western Lama, Dutch Lama, Lama Ornido, he is the most popular in Bulgaria. The last 20 years, he has several centers in different cities in Bulgaria, and this image taken this year, it speaks a lot. This was his teaching in Sofia, in Bulgaria, when people from the whole region came to listen to his talk. So I just went and go out. I couldn't handle to stay there for a while. Anyway, so Lama Olenidal, with the blessing of one of his teachers, Sherab Gyaltsen Rinpoche, 2 years ago they built the only stupa in Bulgaria, in the village called Palana, close to the capital Sofia. So the next school, which is presented strongly in Bulgaria, this is the Nyingma school, the Asian school of Tibetan Buddhism. And it is presented through this period of years with three lineages of Nyingma. These are Pölyu, Shechen, and Dzogchen. And only Pölyu, it is, how to say, rooted in among the Bulgarian until nowadays. Shechen, there were some organization, but it doesn't exist anymore. Dzogchen lineage was just several teachers, they visit Bulgaria, but without organization. So Pölyu is one of the 6 schools in Nyingma tradition. It was officially registered as a center in 2011, and the main teacher who is coming and founded the center, he established the center in 2011, even though he visited Bulgaria in 2002. This is an interesting image of Tibetan Lama with the most sacred and popular Bulgarian saint, Ivan Ryuski, in the highest mountain of Rizal. This is some images in the Pölyu center with another Pölyu teacher, Khenpo Tenzin Norgay, who is from Bhutan, South Chopra. Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, again from Bhutan, he visited Bulgaria once. He just gave a talk without establishing community or group and so on, but his presence in Bulgaria was very, very important as well. So Dzogchen Ranyak Rinpoche, presenting the Dzogchen tradition, he visited, these are some of our students in Tibetan language in Sofia University. Sometimes we are fortunate to welcome Tibetan Lamas among the students. Behind you can see Jamchu Senchu Rinpoche, Maki Panaki Yuchi, Jepanya Pamapata, Gomni. Some short prayer about bodhicitta, spreading the enlightened heart or compassion. As presenting one of the, again, Kagyu tradition, Drukpa Kagyu tradition, there is one teacher called Khenpo Ramesh. He is from Kinwa. Yes. So he has come many times in Bulgaria. He states that he was Bulgarian in his previous lives. He loves Bulgarian people. He had a center and organization, Budicita Foundation and Kampagar, with the name of his center in Sopema. The similar organization he has in Bulgaria. Right now he's teaching Heart Sutra in Bulgaria in some of the city. This is his passionate talk during the opening of one Buddhist exhibition in the National Gallery. And the Sakya tradition was also presented in the past. Nowadays there is no more center. This is again the Western Lama, who had a center for a while, long time ago, actually in Bulgaria, who's staying basically in UK. Started, as I remember, he's married to a Bulgarian woman. This is how he established his center in Bulgaria. And Gelugpa, one of the Gelug teacher, this is Geshe Tandin, who also visited Bulgaria. He has group disciples in Sofia and 2 other cities in Bulgaria. And he and his main attendant, Tritu Rinpoche, again visiting our Sofia University Center with the students in Tibetan languages. So they also have quite strong community in Bulgaria. Bon tradition is also presented in Bulgaria. This is Gordon Zundrup. He is disciple of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. He's coming around 3 times in Bulgaria. This is again another program in the Sofia University related with Himalayan Buddhism. He was presented his way of practice tradition. And this is one Bhutanese nun who is also a doctor, very lovely friend of ours. She also visited our programs during the Himalayan Buddhist seminars in Bulgaria. And finishing with the beginning, Mongolia, Tibetan Buddhism. This is a recent visit of Mongolian Lama. He's also called Kama Lama, Natsak Dorje. He's an eminent Buddhist teacher and physician. He's a doctor. He has a huge medical clinic in Mongolia. He has visited 3 times Bulgaria, and last time he gave an amazing talk in front of our students, and he gave an oral transmission of medicine Buddha and Shakyamuni mantra among the students, which was a very unique experience. So at the end, these are some activities about Himalayan Tibetan Buddhism at the National Gallery. These are our students from Sofia University who came to the National Gallery, and the Blue teacher Pema Rinpoche, he was giving a short talk among the Buddhist artifact in the gallery. And this is again Kempora Mej visited kids who came and they drew mandala and different Buddhist images in the gallery. And this is the last event that we had in the National Gallery on 6th of July, celebrating His Holiness the Dalai Lama's birthday, and July, August. So it was a miracle that just 1 month after I came to Delhi and I stayed in front of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it just was like a movie. We were seeing the images of His Holiness, and just without having idea what will happen, I came to the conference and I came to Tibet House, and it's still like, wow, where I am, what is happening? And the lady that you will see on the first image, she's our great professor in Sanskrit and Indian literature. She's coming next week as well for 1 year program in JNU University. And this is again an image from the Himalayan Buddhist art from National Gallery, which will stay until end of September in Sofia. So, Pujichena, thank you so much. Kalinje, Dhanyavad, thank you so much for your attention and patience to listen these strange efforts to cover a huge territory of spreading of Tibetan Buddhism. And once again, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here and to be able to talk about something which I love so much, like Tibet and Tibetan culture, and of course, Dharma. Thank you.
we are very thankful to you for the very profound and interesting. It was really fascinating going through all the historic, very important historic events that we could really take a look at these pictures. And so thank you so much, and maybe we can take a few questions if
Yes,
if
please.
time permits. So any questions you would like to have?
First of all, very deep appreciation. Thank you very much. I've never really known this area, but historically we know that Mongolia had great people like Artan Khan, Kushri Khan, Kublai Khan. And also you spoke of St. Petersburg. And again, I admire people like Helena Roerich
Yes.
and Nicholas Roerich. And I think this connection, maybe even Madame Blavatsky and India, and all that Nicholas and Helena did, I think a lot of that you've touched upon.
Yes.
And I think as far as Mongolia is concerned, one of the greatest historical events was the coming of Buddhism to the tribe of Genghis Khan. And then peace ensued in that whole region. Genghis Khan was known as one of the most murderous hordes that ravaged through Northern Asia and then into Europe. So you touched a tremendous historical. You would have been saying
Actually,
that.
honestly, I was afraid to pronounce Genghis Khan or Khan because this is so profound. And you have to be really expert to talk about that. I'm not expert in the Mongolian history. That's why I'm always afraid. Oh my God, these are so important, so great emperors, people. What can I say about it? So thank you that you did it instead of me.
Well, even Kublai Khan,
Yes.
uniting northern and southern China.
Yeah.
We have a different group here. I've been coming to Tibet House for 30 years now.
Wonderful.
And if there was Lokesh Chandra here, he would have, first of all, appreciated this vast sweep that you took, the Golden Triangle in
Yeah.
Siberia. And it's too large a question to ask you, but I have myself struggled with trying to find common ground between Vajrayana Buddhism and shamanism.
Yeah.
And I've done Machia, Eliade, and those who've written on
Oh, yeah.
shamanism. They said Siberian shamanism one of the strongest shamanisms.
Yeah,
in
and
the
even
whole-
nowadays.
in the
it's
whole world,
interesting,
shamanism. But I am not able to find what exactly was how did Buddhism, or let's say the Vajrayana school, and mainly Tibetan Vajrayana school, including, of course, we talk of Gelug, but I think the Nyingma school would be
Nyingma,
much
yes.
more
It's more
attuned with shamanism. But anyway, that's a large topic I won't like to take up. But thank you so much for this absolutely wonderful,
Thank you.
and I've taken a lot of your pictures because I want to write something on this.
Wonderful.
And I hope you don't mind that
No,
I took
no.
those pictures
Not
without
belong to
asking
me.
you.
So
Thank you very much once again.
thank you. By the way, a few days ago, I had a short talk in JNU University in the Center for International Study Mongolian Department. So I strongly recommend Professor Sony. He said he has several publications about shamanism. He's expert in Mongolian study. He even got award from Mongolian president for his contribution. So he published several articles about shamanism and Buddhism in Mongolia. So you can find them online. And I was also very impressed because I had several courses about Siberian shamanism from my professor, our main director of Center for East Asian Studies in Soviet University. He's from St. Petersburg. He is a disciple of Kuznetsov, who was the disciple of Yuri Ryorikh. You have the dictionary in your library, and the story about family Ryorikh, India, Tibet, Russia, it's extremely interesting, including Bulgaria, because we have a huge collection of Ryorikh painting from Himalayas. It's a wonderful direction to talk about it. So we just discussed exactly this point, why shamanism and Tibetan Buddhism it is in the heart of Vajrayana practice, especially in the Nyingma tradition. They're so close in every sense. I can just give one again personal example. When I was in Peru last year, I was able to take an interview from a shaman lady. She is the director of the shamanic organization, and I had a talk with her, and she was telling me like prediction, checkup, and many things. And before that, I went to one lama who is a doctor and a monk who also studied in South India with fluent Tibetan. He made a pulse diagnosis. Whatever he told me and whatever she told me as a shaman, it was absolutely the same thing. Even like ideal advice, what I should do, how I should treat this and that. It was, and my translator, he was a young Turan person. He was shocked because he never went to shaman. He said, "Oh, we Turan people, we don't believe so much in shaman." But I was like, "Oh, you come to Tuva, you don't go to see shaman or lama. It's like impossible." And he himself was shocked how much the lama and shaman told exactly the same thing. And usually you can see even like Kambi Lama, the head of Tuvan people, he has very powerful shaman grandmother. And many of the shaman people, they have Buddhist Lama relatives. So it's a mix in the way of living, the way of perceiving the world and so on. And there are many conditions. And it's very interesting, of course, to talk about it. So thank you so much for your kind words.
If I may just say one more thing, what you did say about Mongolia and the young people being drawn into Christianity because of the westernization.
In Buryatia, in Kalmykia also.
The same thing has happened in the northeast Himalayas, Arunachal Pradesh. You have the Tawang monastery, you have a very good and a strong Buddhist culture there. But then you have the shamanistic groups, the Adi tribes and so many other tribes. And they find Christianity more alluring for them. And it's today 31% of Arunachal. When I went to Arunachal in 76, it was barely 5 or 6%. But this is now a phenomenon because everyone wants material goods, material things. The whole of Nagaland has gone Christian, the whole of Meghalaya has gone Christian.
Okay, but there are policies to encourage that. Now, I mean, if you give 10 lakh rupees a loan to a person who's poor, he's bound to convert to a different religion altogether.
Yeah.
Yes.
But during my talk in JNU in the Sanskrit department, the main professor said that Indian, they are always open to the spirituality. We are not material, we are always spiritual.
See, England was a Protestant country. Now what we have is we are having Catholics.
Yeah.
Because basically England is Protestant, till the end of British rule, till 1947, I mean, we used to have only Protestant Christians in the country.
Yeah.
But it's only recently in the last 20-30 years we are having a surge of Catholicism in this country. So Chhattisgarh is one of the biggest states. We have got the biggest church in Asia and India.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, but the main thing I think is like Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Hindu, if we are able to learn and to respect and to be tolerant among each other. What is going now in Punjab, Haryana, it's so ridiculous, it's so strange because Guru is part of it. But why we cannot be just compassionate? Because all the religions basically, they talk about peace and love and compassion. That what is the problem? So the problem is in human heart, in human mind. No matter we talk about shamanism, we keep doing so much research. Catholic they bring, Protestant they bring. But the fundamental principle, idea, it's very simple. It's just how to make us happy, content, compassionate, to love each other. So we have to work in this direction. Otherwise, what is the point?
I think the biggest ideal of peace that's currently known in the world is one of the statements of His Holiness in the United Nations that every culture, every people, every country says we are peaceful until provoked. Tibet is the only country that can say we were peaceful even when provoked. I think it's a very powerful statement. That when China came in, even when they were provoked, they have kept to peace. Barring a few,
Ahimsa.
ahimsa.
Yes, of course.
that is what Buddhism can give to the world.
So you talked about Bulgaria. How many people actually are practicing Bulgaria? When I was in Sofia during the year 2009-10, my host was Madam Donka Alexandria. Whatever she showed around Sofia was churches only I saw. I hardly saw any this Tibetan center.
You cannot see like that. This very hidden information I shared to you. It's very secret.
How many? You said 6 million. Out of 6 million, how many actually are centers or how many people actually are practicing it?
In Russia, as far as I heard, there are even 2 million Buddhist people officially. So among these 6 million, usually the spiritual people in Bulgaria, even the Buddhist, Hindu, there are a lot of people who follow Hindu tradition, yoga tradition in Bulgaria. Many people. But the people who are spiritually, basically, they are open to believe strong in Christianity, in Hinduism, in Buddhism. They cannot define so strong. I'm Buddhist. I'm officially meant to be Buddhist. Because what impacts so strong on our mentality as Bulgarian? First of all, 5th century under the Turkish Empire, and we survived as this small dot on the map as a nation. Second, the communism, 45 years, which destroyed basically the ideal conception of spirituality. So that's why it's difficult to count. You cannot find publication about Buddhism in Bulgaria. Recently, with a friend of mine from Bulgaria Academy of Science, we published something on this subject. It's so new, 1991 only. You cannot see the people on the streets and, what do you think, how many people practice Buddhism? So there are basically 10, 20 people in different groups and so on. But they can go in the church, they can do so many things. We don't have tradition for that. You're never born as a Buddhist or doing. I was able to teach in Indonesia last year, and I met in the biggest Muslim country in the world. I met children who were born in Buddhist family. Not since 8th century, Buddhism was so powerful in Indonesia, and somewhere it is preserved. But in Bulgaria, we don't have nothing to preserve, so we cannot say how many people. So because they are coming, following one group, they go to another group, they practice a little bit. This is very typical, pick up here and there in Hindu and Buddhist groups, and there is not really foundation. Of course, there are many challenges, many problems. The main problem of Tibetan Buddhism in the West is related with the term Lamaism. How we can be devoted to Guru, to Lama. We don't have this conception. We are strongly individualist, selfish, egoistic-oriented civilization. I am the best, I'm great. How can listen to somebody to tell me? But you, in India, in Bhutan, in Tibet, originally, initially, you have the idea of devotion, dedication of someone who is higher than you. So these and many other things are quite challenging. So what your question maybe will come, the answer will come in several years, where we can really see the seeds of growing of Buddhism as a whole.
In the university, how many students you have?
We don't have Tibetan studies, so I teach Tibetan culture in Indology, Korean department. Now we have a new Southeast Asia programs with between 10 to 30 students. But unfortunately, nobody of them continue with Tibetan language. It's very difficult for us. My professor, Alexander Fedotov from St. Petersburg University, he was the only one teaching Tibetan Buddhism. I started classical Tibetan several years ago with him. We were 20 students. Second year, 3 students, and at the end, only me. There is nobody here. Same thing with my students. So, yes, that's all maybe. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, I think we have reached the end of this today's very wonderful and profound talk by Dr. Ludwig. And we could take a very profound message of interdependency and love, compassion, and so forth, and many more to explore yet. So thank you so much, and on behalf of Tibet House, I'd like to thank formally our speaker today, Dr. Ludmilla, with the traditional Tibetan scarf and a souvenir depository.
Thank you so much. Usually whenever we talk about Dharma, Tibet, Buddhism, we always finish with dedication. And we have a venerable here among us. Maybe she can do a short dedication prayer, if you don't mind. Okay. So it's just, we can do it by our heart, and naturally to dedicate whatever we have discussed, talk for the benefit of all sentient beings. For the benefit that we have accumulated, the good karma, if there is, let it be for the benefit of all sentient beings. Let it be peace on the roads of India and on the roads of the whole world and on the roads of our hearts. Thank you once again. Thank you so much.
And thanks, Tenzi and Tenzi. One more. Thank you so much. So in Bulgaria we always, usually we hug. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow, so many things. Thank you. Thank you once again to everybody for coming.
Thank you all for coming here tonight and joining with us, and have a good night.